Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. We have heard about tariffs now for what seems to be an eternity, and they are finally being implemented. And the question is, how is that going to affect the New York City real estate market overall, and particularly you, if you are planning on renting, buying, or selling in New York City? Well, let's talk about it. I'm Dewey. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button, and let's dive right into a very hot topic. I've said this many times over, but it's worth reminding us all that the New York City real estate market is a very different real estate market than anywhere else in the United States. We don't tend to follow the same trends, and we are not affected in the same way. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but we tend to be a little bit more resilient because of our building structures in New York City and because of the costs associated with those building structures. So usually we don't mimic what may be going on in the rest of the United States. With that said, there has been a lot of volatility in the stock markets and the other markets, and it's caused a lot of uncertainty throughout all the real estate markets, and New York City certainly is not excluded from that. But with that said, let's take a look at two things. Let's take a look at the immediate effects and what may be the long-term effects, and see how things are going in the New York City real estate market. In New York City, we actually have two really huge markets. We have the buying and selling market, and we also have the rental market, which is one of the largest in the world. So we have to look at what's happening with both. For the rental market, we're pretty much in our prime season, and that's going to continue all the way through early September. The summer can get really intense with rentals in New York City, with people moving here for their first time jobs, or students coming to school here, or just the bulk of leases expiring and people moving around in the city. So what has happened to the rental market since the tariffs have gone into effect? I would have to say not much, really, not in the immediate. We are still seeing a huge amount of activity, a huge amount of people looking to rent in New York City, and the rentals are tight, and there's just as much competition as always. And in addition, of course, rents are at an all-time high. So we haven't seen the rents come down. We haven't seen the influx of people be affected. So overall, in the immediate, right now, the rental market does not seem to be affected. Surprisingly so, in the sales market, contracts signed are actually up. They're above the number of where we were last year. They're pretty much at seasonal norms. We're hitting most of the numbers for what we would consider a normal and fairly neutral market. We are definitely not in a hot seller's market, definitely not in a hot buyer's market, but there's a lot of activity out there, and there are a lot of contracts being signed. Now, in the immediate, where that may have affected people is from the stock market volatility, and that has affected some of their liquidity to be able to buy into a co-op, for example, where co-op boards do look at post-close liquidity. Then sometimes that has knocked people out of certain price ranges or put a dent in the amount of down payment that they can put down, that sort of thing. So the stock market volatility, which has seemed to be caused by the tariff implementation, has affected people in the short term. Still, we are seeing contracts signed. As I said, the number is up. So overall, would I say that the tariffs have affected the sales market in New York City? Not that much, and that surprises, I think, everyone. Now, the future, if the tariffs continue, I think that that will be an entirely different story, because we're talking about a lot of buildings in New York City that need a lot of maintenance to keep them running smoothly and to make sure that they are up to codes and the different things that New York City requires. So a lot of the construction is going to cost more. A lot of the maintenance is going to cost more. And for the landlords, that's definitely going to raise their costs to run the buildings, which means all that cost will be passed on to renters. So the bad news is that rents are already really high in New York City, and probably because of the tariffs and what it takes to maintain those buildings, the rents are going to see an increase. Where we may be able to judge whether or not the tariffs are going to really impact rental increases is during the slow months. So during the winter months, the rental season does become quite a bit slower for Manhattan, and usually rents go down, concessions are offered, perhaps you'll get 1 free month's rent, something like that. Usually happens during those dark, cold winter months. But it's going to be interesting to see if the tariffs, and because of rising costs, which will probably probably be more evident by the end of the year are going to affect the prices in wintertime, and also the concessions. Maybe not as many concessions will be offered. So if that does happen, that would be a very clear sign that come the busy season in rentals, skyrocketing rents are going to be seen. Now, in the sales market, we would have to look at new construction first, because we do have quite a bit of new construction that started post-pandemic and are kind of beginning to be at the normal kind of construction we would see in New York City. But those new construction projects are now going to cost more, and those costs will have to be passed on in the sales price. So the construction materials are just going to cost more if the tariffs continue, and so that will most definitely affect the price points and the common charges for the buildings in new construction. Likewise, every condo and every co-op building in New York City do have common charges, or in the co-op's case, we call them maintenance charges. And it is inevitably going to cost more to run these buildings. These older buildings particularly need a lot of repair work. Again, I mentioned there's lots of codes that these buildings must meet that are put on by the city, like the local law 11. If you've been in New York City, you will see a lot of scaffolding around buildings, and that has to happen every 7 to 10 years, where the work on the outside of the building has to be done and meet certain specifications to make sure that bricks and things don't fall on our heads. That's ultimately a very positive thing, but it is costly, and costs of doing that is most definitely going to rise because of the tariffs. So how does that get passed on to shareholders and owners in condos? Well, it's going to be through those common charges and through the maintenance. We have already seen an increase in maintenance payments across the board since the pandemic, because the pandemic added some extra cost. It delayed a lot of projects, and the materials increased in their costs. So a lot of maintenance and common charge payments have gone up much higher than they have in the past. So you might see a 5, 6, sometimes even a 15% increase. I've seen one building that had an 18% increase, because buildings must run their business. They must maintain their repairs, and pretty much the only way they can do that is by the revenue earned from the common charges. So I suspect that we're going to continue seeing rising maintenance and common charges in the city, and that is most likely going to affect the price points of apartments. Because if, for example, you're carrying a mortgage on the apartment, you're going to have your mortgage plus your maintenance payment, and that combined, if that is too high, it usually begins to bring down the values in a building. Now, we do still see most buildings and most apartments in New York City appreciating in their value. That's a given over time, but there may be a reckoning there where the prices are going to have to come down to make that combined payment more favorable than what it would be if prices stayed on the higher side. So there's always a balance to be made. If the co-op building is already perhaps in a little bit of distress because of their finances, it may get more difficult for them, and they may have to seek out second mortgages or refinances, which may be at a higher interest rate, which is going to cause a little bit of discomfort there in the maintenance payments. Lots of factors, and all of that is going to be caused by the tariffs. So buyers are going to be affected, sellers are going to be affected most likely in the long term. So in the short term, not so bad. In the longer term, it might be a little painful, but is that really going to affect the New York City market? Most likely not. People come here for a myriad of different reasons. They come here for career, they come here because they want to live this lifestyle, and if they really need to and want to, they're still going to come to New York City. We see an amazing amount of activity both in the rentals and the sales market every year, and I do not anticipate that that's going to stop anytime soon despite the rising costs. However, prices will be affected, types of apartment, and what people are gravitating to in terms of the types of apartment they may be interested in because of the price point is most likely going to change. But that is the nature of the New York City real estate market. We are constantly a moving target. We are on our own little island here. Again, I say we don't mimic the rest of the real estate market, and it is a fascinating real estate market. If you need further guidance, take a look at all the different ways you can get in contact with me. I would be happy to speak to you about your rental or your purchase, and I'll see you next time.